If you grew up in the early 90s, you remember Saturday mornings like they were sacred. You'd wake up before your parents, plant yourself in front of the TV, and just watch. But here's what nobody talks about. For every cartoon you remember, there were 15 you forgot by Monday. Not because they were boring, because they were weird, rushed, and gone before you could blink. From the cartoon that stripped a beloved DC Comics character down to an environmental mascot, to the most shameless Back to the Future, the animated series. The Back to the Future film trilogy had concluded in 1990 with the third installment, leaving behind one of the most beloved science fiction franchises in cinema history. The intellectual property was hot, the characters were recognizable worldwide, and CBS moved quickly to translate that cultural capital into a Saturday morning cartoon. On paper, it had everything. Christopher Lloyd and Bill Nye the Science Guy appeared in live-action educational segments between cartoon sequences, lending the show a degree of genuine credibility. The animated Doc Brown and Marty McFly traveled through time solving problems and encountering historical figures. But the show suffered from a fundamental tension that would prove impossible to resolve. The films worked because of the specific chemistry between specific actors, the wit of the original screenplay, and a genuine sense of cinematic stakes. A Saturday morning cartoon aimed at younger children could not replicate those qualities. What it produced instead was a competent but inessential appendix to a story that had already been told. The show ran for 2 seasons, one of the rare entries on this list that actually survived its first, but the second season saw significant quality decline. And the series quietly concluded with no fanfare and very little lasting impact on the franchise's legacy. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures. The success of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1989 had made the air guitar-playing, phone-booth-paddling duo of Bill S. Preston Esquale and Ted Theodore Logan into genuine pop culture icons. The film's catchphrases penetrated every corner of youth culture. A sequel, Bogus Journey, was in production. Fox Kids moved to capitalize on the momentum by launching an animated series in 1991, which ran into 1991. The problem was a familiar one. The original film's appeal rested heavily on the specific comic chemistry of Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter, 2 real performers with real physicality and real comedic instincts. Replacing them with animated stand-ins voiced by different actors gutted the show's most important asset. The time travel premise offered genuine narrative possibilities that the creative team never fully exploited. The show was amiable and reasonably produced, but it never found a reason to exist beyond the brand recognition of its title characters. It ended after a single season, a footnote in the franchise's history, and a cautionary example of the gap between a great film and a viable Saturday morning property. Darkwing Duck. In Let's Get Dangerous, the show understood that parody only works if you actually care about the thing you're parodying. Darkwing Duck loved superhero conventions deeply enough to send them up brilliantly. To understand why Hammerman exists, you need to understand exactly how enormous MC Hammer was at his peak. In the late 1980s and the first years of the 1990s, MC Hammer was not just a popular musician. He was a full-scale cultural phenomenon. Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em, released in 1990, became one of the best-selling rap albums of all time. His signature parachute pants, his dance moves, his hooks, his energy, all of it had penetrated into every corner of mainstream popular culture. He was on magazine covers, he was in television commercials, he was performing at massive arenas. For a particular window of time, MC Hammer was genuinely one of the most famous people on the planet. So when ABC came to him about developing a cartoon series, the logic was not entirely unreasonable. Hammerman premiered on September 7, 1991. The premise went like this. A man named Stanley, a community center worker, receives a pair of magical shoes from a retired superhero called Gramps, otherwise known as Soul Man. When Stanley puts on the shoes, he transforms into the superhero Hammerman, complete with Hammer's signature glasses, parachute pants, and a pair of backup singers who accompany him into battle and help him use music as a weapon against crime. It is important to note that MC Hammer himself did not actually voice the cartoon version of his character. The animated Hammerman was voiced by Clark Johnson. Hammer did appear in live-action segments that bookended each episode, opening with a real scene featuring Hammer and a group of kids establishing a lesson of the week, and closing with Hammer speaking directly to the camera to wrap up that lesson. In practice, it made the cartoon feel like an extended music video with a very thin story stretched around it. The show was also absolutely overloaded with MC Hammer music, woven into nearly every scene, in a way that made the whole production feel less like a cartoon and more like a promotional vehicle for album sales. ABC canceled Hammerman after just one 13-episode season due to poor ratings. By the time the show aired, the peak of Hammer's cultural moment was already beginning to pass. The cartoon arrived at precisely the wrong moment, late enough to feel like a cash-in, but not late enough for anyone to feel nostalgic about it. Little Shop. At number 11 we have Little Shop, genuinely one of the more underappreciated entries on this entire list. The show was based on a creative lineage with genuine artistic credibility. Roger Corman's 1960 original Little Shop of Horrors was a low-budget comedy horror film that had developed a devoted cult following over the decades. That film had then inspired an enormously successful off-Broadway musical in 1982, which had in turn been adapted into a major Hollywood musical film in 1986 with an all-star cast. Little Shop of Horrors had cultural currency, recognition, and a built-in fan base. Fox Kids took that foundation and built an animated series around it, adjusting the premise for a younger audience. The main characters were reimagined as 13-year-olds. Seymour, the young flower shop employee, serves as the central protagonist. Audrey is his love interest. Junior, a talking, hypnotizing plant who sprouts from a 200-million-year-old seed, communicates exclusively in hip-hop dialect, keeping his abilities secret from everyone except Seymour. Each episode revolved around the pubescent social dynamics of this group, with Junior's plant powers providing the comedic and dramatic engine. The show retained the musical DNA of its source material, incorporating musical numbers into episodes, and featuring backup singing flowers reminiscent of the original production's Greek chorus characters. For a Saturday morning cartoon, it had a genuinely distinctive personality and a creative identity that most of its competitors lacked. But Fox Kids executives disagreed with that assessment at the time. After 13 episodes, Little Shop was canceled, leaving a small but genuinely passionate audience of former child viewers who still remember it with real affection. All 13 episodes are currently available on the Internet Archive if you want to find them. Pro Stars. In 1991, Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, and Bo Jackson were not merely famous athletes. They were transcendent cultural icons. Jordan was in the middle of what would become one of the greatest basketball careers in history. Gretzky was already considered the greatest hockey player of all time. And Bo Jackson was the rare dual-sport athlete whose Nike Bo Knows advertising campaign had made him one of the most recognizable faces in all of American sports. Putting all three of them together in a single cartoon seemed, on the surface, like an unbeatable combination. The premise of Pro Stars was straightforward. Jordan, Gretzky, and Jackson team up as real-life superheroes, using a combination of their athletic abilities and high-tech gadgetry to respond to emergencies and help kids around the world. The show opened each episode with a live-action segment featuring one or more of the actual athletes, commenting on the upcoming cartoon, lending an air of authenticity and direct connection to the real people. It is worth noting that the show had originally been intended to air on ESPN as part of a children's programming block that never actually materialized. When that plan fell through, NBC picked it up for Saturday mornings, which speaks to how confident everyone was that three of the biggest names in sports could carry a cartoon on their reputation alone. The formula was extremely predictable. A child in need, the Pro Stars arrive to save the day, a moral is delivered. But the sheer cultural weight of having those three specific athletes attached to the property made it watchable for a generation of sports-obsessed kids. The live-action segments added a novelty factor that other cartoons could not replicate. But novelty fades. After 13 episodes, the ratings could not justify a second season. Pro Stars was canceled, a reminder that even the most powerful celebrity associates have an expiration date when the underlying content does not evolve. Space Cats. Possibly the most conceptually bizarre entry on this entire list, Space Cats was created by Paul Fusco, the man behind Elf, the wildly popular 1980s sitcom about an alien life form living with a suburban family. Fusco clearly had a formula he believed in: alien creatures interacting with humans in a comedic, family-friendly context. Elf had made that formula work brilliantly in live action. Space Cats was his attempt to translate a version of that energy into animation with a twist. The premise involved alien cats who come to Earth specifically to help humans secretly, without being detected, in the matter of cosmic guardian angels who happen to be felines. The show was a hybrid format combining live-action puppet sequences hosted by Charles Nelson Riley with animated sequences, creating something that did not fit cleanly into any single category. It was part puppet show, part cartoon, part public service announcement, with a goofy moral of the week built into every episode. The concept sounds like it should have worked. The ALF legacy gave it credibility. The hybrid format was genuinely unusual and could have been a distinctive selling point. But the execution did not land. Combination of Riley's extremely theatrical, over-the-top hosting style with the animated sequences left young viewers confused rather than entertained. The tonal balance was fundamentally off. The humor felt aimed at adults in the live-action segments, while the animation aimed at younger children, and the two halves never quite found a coherent shared voice. Ratings dropped quickly. Space Cats was canceled after 13 episodes and quietly disappeared from television schedules without leaving much of a trace. Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars. And unlike most entries on this list, Bucky O'Hare and the Toad Wars actually had genuine quality behind it. The show was based on a cult comic book series created by Larry Hama and Michael Golden, two names with serious credentials in the comic book world. The story followed Bucky O'Hare, a green anthropomorphic rabbit who serves as captain of a spaceship called the Righteous Indignation, leading a crew of misfit characters against the militaristic Toad Empire that was threatening to conquer the known universe. The premise was solid science fiction adventure, with strong character dynamics, compelling villains, and genuinely interesting world building. The timing of the show was not accidental. The success of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had demonstrated conclusively that there was an enormous market for action-adventure cartoons featuring anthropomorphic animal characters. Bucky O'Hare had all of those ingredients: action sequences, memorable characters, catchphrases, a genuine narrative arc across the season, a video game adaptation, and an arcade game. But there was a critical structural problem that undermined everything else. The show aired in syndication rather than on a major network. Syndication went no consistent time slot. It aired at different times on different channels in different markets. Kids could not reliably find it. Parents could not set a consistent schedule for watching it. And on top of that, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was still dominating the exact audience Bucky O'Hare was trying to reach. No. 7 Toxic Crusaders. This one requires a little bit of context to fully appreciate how strange its existence was. The Toxic Avenger is a 1984 cult film from Troma Entertainment. It is a low-budget, R-rated, extremely violent, and deliberately crude superhero parody about a nerdy janitor who falls into a vat of toxic waste and emerges as a hideously deformed but incredibly powerful mutant with a mop as his weapon. It was the kind of film that played at midnight screenings, found its audience through VHS copies passed between friends, and became beloved precisely because of how transgressive and outrageous it was. It was absolutely, definitively, not a children's property. And yet, in 1991, someone looked at the Toxic Avenger and decided it was the perfect foundation for a Saturday morning cartoon aimed at children. The logic, such as it was, went something like this. Environmental themes were popular in children's media. Captain Planet had launched in 1990 and was performing well. Mutant characters were huge, thanks to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Wish Kid. In 1991, Macaulay Culkin was the biggest child star on the planet. Home Alone had come out in November of 1990 and had become one of the highest-grossing comedies ever made. His face was everywhere. Every network, every studio, every marketing department wanted a piece of that Culkin magic. NBC moved fast. They developed an animated series built entirely around the concept of Culkin's star power, a show called Wish Kid. In the cartoon, Culkin voiced a boy named Nick McClary, who discovers that his baseball glove has magical powers. Specifically, it can grant him one wish per week. The catch, naturally, is that every wish comes with unintended consequences, leading to the kind of comedic hijinks that fill 13 episodes of a Saturday morning cartoon. Where's Waldo? In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Where's Waldo book series was a genuine cultural phenomenon. Every kid had at least one of the books. Finding Waldo hidden in those incredibly detailed, chaotic crowd illustrations was genuinely satisfying. It was interactive, it was challenging, and it rewarded patience and attention. The book sold in enormous numbers, and Waldo became one of the most recognizable characters in children's media. So CBS decided to turn it into a Saturday morning cartoon, which immediately raises the obvious question that apparently nobody in the room asked out loud. How exactly do you make an animated series about a character whose entire appeal is that you have to find him? The creative team tried to answer that question by building a proper narrative framework around the concept. They gave Waldo a talking dog named Woof. They created a villain named Odlaw, which, if you look closely, is Waldo spelled backwards. a detail that is genuinely clever. They added a narrator character called Wizard Whitebeard to guide the story, and they sent Waldo traveling around the world each episode, with the show pausing occasionally to challenge viewers to spot hidden things in the background, attempting to recreate that interactive searching experience on screen. It was colorful and reasonably well animated, but it fundamentally missed the point of why people loved the books in the first place. The books were engaging because you were doing something active, searching, hunting, problem-solving. Watching a cartoon where someone just tells you where to look is the opposite of that experience. The ratings were never strong enough to justify bringing it back, and after 13 episodes, Waldo vanished from Saturday mornings, which, given his reputation, was perhaps the most fitting ending possible. Yo Yogi! By the early 1990s, Hanna-Barbera was sitting on a gold mine of classic animated characters. Yogi Bear, Boo Boo, Cindy Bear, Snagglepuss. These were icons. Kids who had grown up in the 1960s and 70s had real emotional connections to these characters. But there was a problem. The executives at NBC looked at these characters and decided they felt old. They felt dated. They needed a makeover for the 1990s generation. Their solution? Make them teenagers. Set the whole show in a shopping mall. Load the dialogue with 90s slang. Give everyone neon outfits and a skateboard. And that is exactly what they did. Swamp Thing. On paper, this one had absolutely everything going for it. DC Comics had already established Swamp Thing as a serious, beloved character in the comic book world. The character had depth, layers, and a fan base that genuinely cared about the mythology. Fox was aggressively looking for the next big superhero cartoon to dominate Saturday mornings. They had the character rights, they had the network slot, and toy manufacturer Kenner had already put together an entire product line ready to ship to store shelves. This should have been a slam dunk. The Pirates of Dark Water. This is the entry on this list that deserves the most passionate defense, and the one whose cancellation, in retrospect, seems like the greatest waste of potential in the entire 1991 Saturday morning landscape. The Pirates of Dark Water was produced by Hanna-Barbera and launched in 1991 after a 5-episode miniseries called Dark Water had aired the previous year as a test. The premise was genuinely ambitious. A dying alien world called Myr, entirely covered by a global ocean, is being slowly consumed by a mysterious, corrosive substance called dark water. A young prince named Ren sets out aboard a ship to gather the 13 treasures of Rule, the only artifacts capable of stopping the dark water and saving the world, joined by a roguish pirate captain named Ios, a female warrior scholar named Ios, and a monkey bird creature named Niddler. Hammerman is not the worst of 1991. This is big. Actually, returning to Hammerman for our final entry, because it so perfectly encapsulates every single mistake that defined the celebrity cash-in cartoon era of 1991, that it earns the top position on any list of the era's failures. Famous name? Check. Merchandising potential? Check. Network backing? Check. Actual substance, compelling stories, and a reason to keep watching beyond the first episode? Nowhere to be found. Hammerman is not on this list because it was the worst cartoon made in 1991. It is on this list because it is the most instructive failure, the one that most clearly and completely reveals the thinking that produced so many of these canceled shows. These are the shows that didn't make it. And their failure, it turns out, is just as interesting as anyone's success.